From the Sky News Centre, this is Paul Murray Live.
G'day, good evening, especially if it's the first time you've watched us in 2024. My name is Paul Murray. This is an opinion show. Relax if that shocks you. We've got plenty to talk about. But of course, the news today was all about the former Prime Minister, Scott Morrison. He took to social media to say it's time to move on. He'll be doing so at the end of February. He'll have the opportunity to give a valedictory address, to be able to speak about people big and small, but most importantly, his beautiful family. Good to see him with Jenny and the girls. Of course, the media has been desperately waiting for this moment, and they were very excited. Full breaking news, 5 fire alarms, let's go.
Hello, Scott Morrison has announced his retirement from politics, ending a career as one of Sydney's most popular MPs and one of the most divisive Prime Ministers this country has seen.
The self-described political bulldozer has opted to make a quiet exit next month to take up a role in the US defence sector.
Australia's 30th Prime Minister steered the nation through some of its most troubling times since World War II. As COVID swept the globe, the Morrison government moved swiftly to lock down our borders and rebuke China, putting the economy at the forefront of its response.
One of Sydney's most popular MPs. That's one of the nicest things Channel 10 said in the past 5 years about him. Anyway, now, as you know, we've been on the journey all the way from being, of course, in opposition as the shadow immigration spokesperson all the way through as his many ministries, the Prime Ministership and even post. We've been able to ride along, so I'm pleased to say that Scott Morrison will be in the man cave. In fact, is, and I'll get to him in a moment or two's time, but it's been incredible to see power up close for its good and bad, but he's been very loyal to us as, well, I look forward to discussing with him in a couple of moments' time. But first, a little bit of hype, a little bit of conversation happening right now, which is that I've got to be honest. I think a lot of people in Canberra watch too many movies. Like, remember the Men in Black movie where the agents have the ability to press a button, look you in the eye and say, oh, you completely forget everything that's going on. And perhaps the Prime Minister thinks that he is a Jedi Knight, a Jedi Master who has the capacity to just tell you what you know is different.
Let me see your identification.
You don't need to see his identification.
We don't need to see his identification.
These aren't the droids you're looking for.
These aren't the droids we're looking for.
He can go about his business.
You can go about your business.
Move along.
Move along.
Now, we've made this point a few times, and perfect examples about the ability to say, forget what I had to say, or reality is not what you are living, is of course the central promise out of that 2022 election, which was that cost of living would go down. Things would get better if you chose the party that became the government. Remember, no ifs, no buts, no asterisks, no maybes, no carry the one, no but maybe on Tuesday somebody else. A Labor government will lower the cost of living. And then that far right-wing university, the University of Melbourne, among others, was able to view that in 2022, into 2023 and now into the verge of 2024, that more than half of all of Australians are only just, and I mean just, making ends meet. Now, of course, we were told all the way through when times were particularly difficult in the first full year of the government in 2023 that they were all hands on deck. Every idea was being used. Everything they could possibly, every lever they could possibly pull for cost of living they would pull. But then, of course, they decided not to cut petrol taxes while petrol was hitting all-time highs. It's still bloody high around the country, but certainly particularly high in Brisbane. But the government said, no, none of that business, because, of course, they thought that it wasn't a real political issue. And, of course, elections were a long time away. And there are people who have been willing to make this point to the Prime Minister directly, an opposition you would assume, but then people from traditionally Labor areas, like the Fowler MP and KK killer, Di Lee, who actually asked questions about this very specific thing to the Prime Minister's non-answer inside the Parliament. You see, the Jedi mind trick doesn't work on the people who represent the working class of the country as opposed to the people who fly at the front of the plane or the private plane, because they know that the only time they have to engage with the working class is once every 3 years, and they'll probably vote for us because we're better than the other guy. And then there's, of course, the reality for millions of people around the country who are trying to pay off the biggest asset they will ever own. Remember, in Australia, the way it works is that you do your best to save as much as you can, to be able to get the deposit, to then buy the house that you may well live in by yourself, you may live in with your partner, you will eventually trade up and have kids. You'll take care of the garden every Saturday for the best part of, 30 years? And the plan is that you can amass wealth through this because guess what? You've got to play financial kaplunk before you move into the older stages of your life, and that's as much money as you will have to be able to take care of yourself and your family as you see out the final years of your life. Well, what has been the reality of this government? The reality is the Albo dozen of interest rate rises. And again, let's go to the far right-wing commentators at The Guardian who actually have been able to work out the consequences of the Reserve Bank continuously increasing them, including after the government got a hand-picked version of the person they wanted to actually run the bank. In fact, if you have a look here, as we've shown you many times before, that almost half of Australian mortgage holders are under financial stress. That was towards the end of last year. It's exactly the same this year. This was just before the November increase. And as you can see, the monthly increases are $1,200 on a $500,000 loan, $1,800 on a $750,000 loan, and $2,500 on a $1 million loan. Or think about it this way. Australians that have been paying off mortgages in the past 12 months are now staring down the barrel of having to find an extra $14,500 to pay it off this year as opposed to before the current mob became the government. $21,000 for anyone who's trying to pay off something about $750,000. And, well, with many prices being over $1 million around the country, the likelihood is that the number of $29,000 is an underestimate compared to where many people are. That's extra money that's all been having to be found. Now, of course, the reality is, again, cost of living, a major issue all the way through the first part of the government in 22, the entire year of 23. And as we were moving towards the end of things last year, what was the government doing? Well, as they were moving towards confirming a massive budget surplus, well, guess what? There was nothing for people who needed something to help them when it came to the cost of living. Nothing for people who were trying to find the extra, anywhere between, $14,000 and $30,000 a year to pay off their house. Nothing for the people who need to fill up their car or their truck to go to work or to move things around this big, beautiful country. Instead, though, what the expectation was that the headline numbers were great because all the people who talk about politics, many of which will be hate watching now, say surplus equals tick, surplus equals awesome, where the reality is that for Australians, even Melbourne University is telling you that more than half of Australians are finding it difficult. This Christmas just gone, people literally queued for food so they would have enough money for a present for their families. A cost of living inquiry, which has been going around the country, having a look at things, is telling us that people who have jobs are still living in their cars, and to make sure that they have water to drink, they get ice at the start of the day. That'll keep what food they have cold, and then they will drink that melted ice as water. That was evidence that came out of a hearing in Perth. But summer was supposed to be the big reset, because we know that last year the political calculation of the Prime Minister was that the Voice would be able to be the ultimate distraction, that it would be the easy achievement of a Prime Minister searching for his place in Wikipedia history. Well, of course, Australia didn't vote no. They voted hell no. Even in Victoria, they voted no. So the Prime Minister wasn't able to have that achievement. Instead, the reality of people's lives continued to become difficult. Yet as this year turns over, we're being told that things are about to change for the better, and the constant focus of every lever that they could be pulling, and I've shown you a couple that they didn't pull, are about to be pulled in favour of those to be taking care of cost of living. Because you see, this poll came out just a couple of weeks ago. Now, obviously, it's the middle of summer, there's cricket, tennis, lots of other things to watch. But more than 70% of Australians believe that cost of living is the number one issue. More than 80% of Australians believe the government hasn't done enough. So the Prime Minister wants you to believe the message, just like not the droids we're looking for or the men in black, that he's all about cost of living. So you see, they floated in the past few days that there was going to be a special meeting of every Labor MP in the country. It'll cost about $500,000 to fly them and their staff to basically be meat puppets in the studio audience of a Prime Minister announcing some changes when it comes to taxation. I'll get to those in a moment or two's time. But this is all really about the multiple days of speculation and then the multiple days of selling whatever the announcement's going to be. It's about trying to, for want of a better term, own the message. And if you own the message, then you're on the front foot. If you're the one deciding what everyone's talking about in politics on that day, you win the day. When you're a Prime Minister that is in the polling situation that he's in, you need to win every day, and then a couple of weeks, and then eventually months. And then people turn around and say that everything is awesome, everything got better. Well, of course, what we know is about to happen here is that one of the ways that the government has been trying to say, get ready, we're pulling on that lever that we haven't been pulling on, is to say that particularly the stage 3 tax cuts are things that need to change. Too much money for people that are just monocle-wearing billionaires or people who are earning over $100,000. There is a slight difference, but apparently not, for the left wing of the Labor Party. So the Prime Minister is out there saying to the very people who, people like Di Lee represent in the Parliament, like middle to low-income workers, that the government's on your side. So they were literally out there saying this week, and the Prime Minister was hinting at cost of living relief, particularly for low and middle income earners. But I've got to say I'm rather interested here. Again, just talking about the levers that were pulled or not pulled. You see, this was the government that actually decided to take away the low to middle income offset, which put simply meant $1,500 guaranteed tax returns. Now, it was introduced as part of COVID. And as I had said, regardless of what anyone took into the last election, I would have screamed from the mountaintops that this needed to be extended for 12 months. Now, obviously, Albo's not going to be listening to me. There's a chance that the former Prime Minister may well have listened to me. But the point is that people needed that $1,500. There were surveys that were telling us that, 36% of Australians factor into their ability to pay bills their tax return. So even if they weren't able to get a big tax return, there was a guaranteed minimum of $1,500. That was for low and middle income workers. So the Prime Minister now wants to get credit for the very people that he made a decision not to help. They can, of course, turn around and say, well, it was the last mob. Well, they have control of the Parliament. With the Greens and David Pocock, Lambie and the rest, they would have been able to pass that in an afternoon. But, of course, they didn't. This affected 10 million workers. 10 million workers is how many people were affected by this decision and why it was a bad decision not to find a way to extend it for 12 months. Remember, this was the budget that turned around and produced, $20 billion surplus? So they had the extra cash. But one of the reasons we were told that you couldn't have more of your money for the past 12 months to help pay for all of the things that I've just talked about and everything else that you know you've been struggling to pay for. How's this the logic from the Assistant Treasurer, not a backbencher, somebody in the room making the decisions about why the government needed the $1,500 back?
It's important that we are ensuring through sound economic management that we don't make the inflation problem worse.
You see, if you have more of your money, you'll spend it. And if you spend it, then that will lead to more inflation. More inflation leads to interest rates and everything gets worse. So then we come to the issue of the stage 3 tax cuts. The Prime Minister out there again saying today that everyone gets a prize.
I support tax cuts and everyone will be getting a tax cut.
But you see, the problem for the Prime Minister is not whether people get a tax cut or not. It's about whether the people who were told they were getting a very specific tax cut will be getting that tax cut. That's the point. Now, lefties and much of the media will try to turn around and say that it's all about the numbers. No, it's about the promise. But because the assumption is that most people don't earn $100,000, so everyone over $100,000 is a Teal or a Liberal voter or probably even sometimes a Greens donor, so they don't matter. They're not going to be part of the Labor coalition that's required to run the country. But of course, these tax cuts aren't just something random. They're something that was passed by the Parliament, that Labor literally voted on. This is the legislation that they voted on. Mm-hmm. Then, of course, they turned around and said in the lead up to the last election, in fact, in an interview on this channel, that they will not be changing anything to do with the legislation that they passed. Yet, as we know, the expectation is that those changes will be announced tomorrow. And yes, it does look like people under $150,000 may end up with a little more money, but don't forget they've already received previous tax cuts. The matter of principle, and whether that matters or not, we will find out all collectively in the next few weeks, but the matter of principle here is whether something that you voted for in the parliament, promised to people when you looked them in the eye, is something you actually deliver, or there's a yeah but. There's no asterisk on the promise of vote Labor and cost of living goes down. There's no asterisk on $275 when it comes to power bills. And there's no asterisk on the people who make up 11% of the population but pay 55% of the tax to be able to keep some of their own money. You know, the same principle that apparently was not okay when it was $1,500 for 10 million workers. So while much of the media will say, genius move, much of Twitter will cheer it all on, for those of us who watch every day the news, we may have a new nickname for the Prime Minister, and that will be Albo One Kenobi.
Move along.
Move along. Move along.
Now, as we know, Pat Cummins is the cricket captain of Australia. He is very successful as a bowler. He's a great bloke on the field. Off the field, a little bit woke, but that's okay. He's just trying to stay in with the cool kids. But sometimes he's a little each way elbow, like that time he was in the ad for the energy company.
Why is this spa not hot? We're supposed to be saving on gas.
Which one of us was saving on gas?
Find your energy deal today at Alinta Energy.
But then apparently he complained to Cricket Australia that he didn't like the sponsor that presumably gave him some money to appear in the ads. If not, he needs a better manager. And of course, they ended up losing that sponsor. Now, interestingly, the financials for Cricket Australia are worth paying attention to because they announced a $17 million loss last year. So perhaps the Alinta money may well have been held. Sorry, how dare I actually follow the details here. Now, of course, Cummins, as the captain of Australia, more than happy to drape himself in the Australian flag in the desperate hope that Bay 18 will somehow love him. But as we have heard today, his plan is that Australia Day should not be on January 26.
I absolutely love Australia. I think it's the best country in the world by a mile, and I think we should have an Australia Day, but I think we can probably find a more appropriate day to celebrate it.
Yeah, just like Cricket Australia's Chief Financial Officer, I probably wouldn't be taking advice from Pat Cummins on this. Instead, I'm going to focus on the local mayor who represents the area that we were talking about before. You know, the actual low to middle income workers, the immigrants to the country. Frank Carbone is, of course, the mayor of Fairfield, and I prefer his take on Australia Day.
We can't keep up, Paul. We do have plenty more. We've got about 10,000 flags, but we keep on ordering them. We're having businesses phoning us up now if they can get flags to give out to their people. We've been overwhelmed with support from local communities. We all need to be united and make sure that we stand together on this wonderful day, which is for us to actually celebrate who we are, and that is Australians.
Now to the former Prime Minister, Scott Morrison. As you know, on this show, and we've been around for a while, we have gone on the full journey, as I said before, from him as a shadow minister to multiple ministries through to the prime ministership and after the 2022 election. We've been there on the day after the 2019 election. We, of course, have done pub tests with him on the Central Coast and in Brisbane, and a rather famous one in Townsville that we'll get to in a moment or two's time. We've spoken to him at Kirribilli House, at all of the offices. He has been very generous with his time to give us the inside run on how his prime ministership was working, because on this program, we let him speak. We let him answer the questions however he wishes, but we actually give him the time to answer, as opposed to much of the rest of the media that, because of, let's be generous there, time constraints, you end up sending 2 seconds or half a second or what somebody else interprets about what he said. We also were able to be there as Australia was being honoured by the United States at the White House, and for this little bogan, that was quite the experience of being able to meet the President of the United States. The photo still stays here in the man cave each and every night just to send lefties crazy. Best selfie ever. And I'm pleased to say that after announcing that in February he will formally step down as the member for Cook, that the place that he decided to speak first to, and here on television, and most importantly, not to me, but to you, is the former Prime Minister, Scott Morrison. G'day, mate.
Hey, Paul.
Lovely to see you.
Good to see you, mate, and g'day to everybody watching tonight. It's great to come here and finally be in the man cave.
Finally be in the man cave.
We've never had an interview here.
Yeah, done the White House, done everything.
We've been everywhere.
Finally, the man cave, it's ticked off.
Here we are.
We'll talk about our experience and all of that in a second, but let's deal with, for those that are desperately trying to write an article in the next couple of minutes.
Yeah.
Why today? Why now?
Well, it's been just over 18 months since the last election. And during that period of time, I've enjoyed getting back home, Jen and the family back at our family home in the Shire. And I've had a great opportunity to get around my local electorate again and to say thank you to a lot of people and to re-engage with them. My electorate in the Shire and southern Sydney, because it takes in those southern parts on just on the other side of the Georges River, have been so amazingly supportive of me over my entire time in Parliament. And your first job, whether you're a Prime Minister, a Treasurer, or anything else, is you're the member for, and my fortuitous case, the member for Cook. It's a place I love. It's where my daughters have been growing up. It's where I go to church. It's where I love the place, as you know, and of course the home of the Mighty Sharks. And it's been good to do all that. But at some point, you need to make some decisions about what you're going to do longer term. And I've sort of come to that view over the last, several months, the last 6 months or so. And some great opportunities have come forward at the end of Parliament last year. And I've had a good opportunity to promote what Australia's been doing, particularly in AUKUS. I mean, AUKUS was a massive agreement, and particularly in the United States and the UK, it is well understood. And I've spent quite a bit of time in the last 18 months promoting AUKUS, promoting the fact that it's bipartisan, which is really important, and had worked with the government to that extent, because it's something that is beyond any one government, any one Prime Minister, and it'll be there like the ANZUS has been there for 70 years. So we've got to that point. The opportunity is now. I can move on. I can say thank you. And one of the reasons I wanted to come on tonight, I know many people have been watching us talk for a long time. You've been terribly supportive. Thank you. I appreciate that. And I really just wanted to come on tonight and say thank you for all that support for Australians who sustained us through some pretty difficult times that we had in this country, particularly, from stopping the boats to standing up to China.
Well, and this is the thing, right, where I was thinking about, look, again, you know where the rest of the media is going to go and how they're going to interpret your time in office and where it goes from here. But you did stop the boats. You did the tax cuts for that, of course, we'll talk about.
Stage 3.
Yeah, we'll have a chat about that in a
policy.
second. For businesses, for workers, there were, of course, the instant asset write-off when it comes to small business. I really like that. It's a very small policy. No one's going to really particularly get into
Joe Hockey started that. But we carried it on, Josh and I.
And particularly when you push it up to 120, I thought that was great. Obviously, standing up to China came at a price, and we all know the multifaceted ways of all of those things. 40,000 lives is how many people were saved based off those early predictions of what was going to happen. You've had the multiple royal commissions into things like, I was just looking at this before, again, aged care, veterans, disability, banks. And most importantly, of course, it's been about faith and family and pride in our country. I just wanted someone somewhere to be able to say that list of things. But give us an idea about what you're planning between now and, say, that final speech. Are you going to be one of those people who stands there and lists every single thing and on the second Tuesday and then I did this and then I did that? Or is it going to be, between now and that time, an opportunity to have a broader reflection?
I think the major opportunity I got between now and then is just to keep saying thank you. Right. And that was my overwhelming feeling actually on the night of the last election. Jenny and I were driving across for our last trip in that capacity across the bridge, and we were both just overtaken with this sense of gratitude. Yes, of course, we were disappointed, naturally, at a massive contrast to just 3 years before in the elation of that. But it is a great privilege to serve your country. And to be able to do it as a Member of Parliament, as a Minister, as a Treasurer and as a Prime Minister, if you get that opportunity. And so I'm just enormously grateful. You let all the extent there's bitterness, you let it go. You let all of those things go. I'm sure there's things that people will need to forgive me for, and I'll forgive them. You just don't carry these things around for you, and you look forward. We live in the best country in the world. Like to keep it that way, and there's plenty of great people from the Liberal Party and the Nationals who can be there to help that. I have no doubt plenty in the Labor Party who want to achieve the same thing. And so saying thank you, Paul, is the main thing. Yeah, there'll come a time, and I participated in the program that Chris put together here at Sky. There'll be another one coming up in another with another broadcaster. But others will reflect on that. It's never been something that's really driven me. Teddy Roosevelt is a great hero of mine. he used to talk about, I'm one of those ones who, was on the field, I know who've known victory and defeat, not one of those timid souls who've known neither, and just looks on from the outside. So, saying thank you and being appreciative and being respectful.
I think most people's brains would explode with paranoia when inevitably somebody's writing the headline right now. ScoMo compares himself to Teddy Roosevelt in interview on Sky News.
Which I didn't.
No, of course not. But I'm saying
he's inspired me.
That's the point of what we're trying to talk about here, is that most people's brains just would explode on how things are presented.
Yeah.
And we talked after the election, but now we've got even more time to ask that question, which is, in the day-to-day, you've got to be involved, you've got to see, you've got to read, you've got to see the feedback, you've got to see what's working and not working. Were there moments when it was frustrating, like it was to every other normal human being? Of
course.
And you went, this is unfair, but then sometimes if there was a big hit, you went, yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, look, that is political life. And political life, my chief of staff used to say, I don't know where he picked up the quote from, maybe it was original. He said, but if you want fair, don't go into politics. And that's not a whinge, that's just a reality. And so if you don't like what happens in there and you get a hard time and people say untrue things about you, well, yeah, that's going to happen. I wish it happened less, and it should never sort of impact on your family and things like that, and that should always be a no-go zone, having a great what people do with their families. But it still happens. But no, you can't complain about the field you're on. You choose a life in public service in politics, and that's going to come with some slings and arrows. The key thing is, and look, my faith informs me a lot on this, is you don't carry it around with you for the rest of your life. And so you ask me why now. Well, now is a good opportunity. I'm really pleased to see Peter Dutton and the team, Susan Lee and the whole, with the Nats and so on, doing really well. They are holding this government to account. I haven't come on here to have a partisan discussion tonight, really, but, they're doing a great job. And they've come through some difficult times. Peter has shown, I think, tremendous leadership since the last election. I've been thrilled to be able to give him my support. Behind the scenes and in front of the scenes as well, and to mentor a number of some of the new ministers, shadow ministers are coming through. A number of them said to me last year, particularly, look, it'd be great if you hung around a little longer, and I was happy to do that. But at some point, locally, while I've enjoyed the time locally, a new candidate needs to be selected by the Liberal Party, and I've given them plenty of time now to go and do that process properly, and I look forward to them putting someone forward for the by-election when it comes who can have that passion and long-term commitment that I certainly took to the job over 16 years ago.
Now, you said you don't want to get partisan, but I have to ask about the Stage 3 stuff, right?
Yeah.
Now, we don't know what the announcement's going to be tomorrow, but I have no doubt how it's going to be spun, which is, yes, we broke a promise, but we did it in the pursuit of fairness. Why does that not stack up?
Well, it's the but. Yes, we broke a promise. No, full stop.
Yeah, correct.
Full stop. I remember the last election. It was very clear. We'd gone to the 2019 election, and that election was about those tax cuts, including the Lamido, which was put in place first after my first, I think it was my first budget as Treasurer in 2016-17, and that went over it. They said it was a 7-year program, and this is the last phase. It really only had 2 features, and that was to wipe out the 37-cent tax bracket, really important. So if you earned everywhere from $45,000 to $200,000 a year, you would pay no more than 30 cents in the dollar for every extra dollar you earned. That was important because it gave people incentive. I mean, bracket creep for the vast majority of Australians was gone. You could just take the extra shift. You could work hard for the promotion. You could go and study. You could do things to really do what you could. And he said very clearly, no changes, we will do it. So I suppose really the question now, and it's for Peter and others, I suppose, to be making this case, and I have no doubt they will, but next time you hear them say, oh, we won't change, franking credits, or we won't change negative gearing, well, on what possible basis, if they make those changes, and I hope in good sense the Prime Minister will not make those changes and keep his word, because I think it's good policy. And if, as you were suggesting in your intro, that they need to have extended the Lamido, well, fair enough. They could do that. I mean, we had it scheduled to come off. I'm not making any
And as
otherwise,
I would have been.
You would have said the same thing to me,
screaming at you for the whole time.
And Josh and I, would have considered that decision in the context of the economic circumstances we're now facing, and whether we could have done that, then we would have made a call about it. But those tax cuts for stage 3, when they were first announced, we said they'll be the last ones to come, and it's sort of people have gone that whole journey. And, it just makes me concerned that, you got to run the country for the people who pay tax too.
Yeah, absolutely. Last one here. I want to take you back to before Prime Minister, and this was as the Treasurer. And we were in Townsville, and we were talking to people about the budget and letting people, because I like the idea again. You've heard what he's had to say, like this, whatever. Okay, but you hear what he's having to say, and I like the idea that normal people in Townsville were able to ask you questions. But it was one of those nights where we were at a brewery.
We were.
And I was amazed at your ability to have the awareness of the numbers because the local product was quite good, wasn't it?
It was good. I remember we'd made some changes to excise when I was Treasurer. And that was to help sort of local craft brewers. And here in Townsville, there was one literally in the pub. And part of that was, my old tourism hat is, local breweries, people coming, drinking the local product and all that. And they were getting taxed at a penalty rate to just the big brewers. Now, that ticked a lot of boxes, letting the little guys be on the same platform as the big guys. And they'd put together, I think it was a ScoMo Pale Ale
beer, yes.
That night. I still got the poster from my staff. And you and I made sure that we, tasted the local product.
The reason I say this is that we supported small business.
We did.
Very effectively on the air, is the best I'll say.
It was a great night, but it was a particularly great night. I always used to enjoy, and you and I started doing them on the Central Coast when I was Treasurer, and we got some pretty, strong feedback. I remember in some of those Q&As that we did, which was a real Q&A.
Yes.
And I really valued those sessions, particularly after a budget when I was Treasurer, because you got a pretty raw, quick response from people about where they're at on some issues, and I enjoyed doing them. We did more of them, and we went out into places where we really went out into places, and people showed up, and they had to get on your list by just
send an email, nothing else.
And then they came, and there you go.
The reason I say all of that, and the reason I go into that, is just again, you've given our viewers a great insight into how it works, at its best, at its worst. And again, no one's saying goodbye or anything weird like that.
No.
But it's just thank you for the opportunities that you gave us. Thank you for the way you served the country. Again, those that want to get into the morsels of who, what and when, there are shows and documentaries about it. There'll be other interviews. But Scott, thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Paul. And thanks very much to all your viewers. And I'm not going anywhere immediately and look forward to following the conversation. But as a private citizen, maybe I'll throw something at television occasionally, like I know some ex-Prime Ministers also do. But I'll just let you know, mate.
Correct. Look forward to it. All right, thank you. Former Prime Minister Scott Morrison. All right, that's a chat with him. Plenty more to follow up in a couple of moments' time. If you want to send me an email, paul@skynews.com.au. And the haters that may be watching us from the press gallery, it's spelled PAUL space MURRAY. Send all complaints to Media Watch, who I'm sure are watching. More in a second. Thank you very much. Here we are for the rest of the show, sitting down with a couple of mates. No sooks, no lefties now, just to keep, again, the hate watchers having fun while the normal people are watching as well. And I appreciate it very much. None other than James Morrow from the Daily Telegraph. And with us here at Sky News, the wonderful Holly Hughes, who's giggling away because she loves the idea of no sooks, no lefties.
I do. And I love the idea that we've got the rest of the show.
Yeah, just, we do have a couple of ad breaks, but still, just, it ain't Channel 2. You don't just have an open, can't just open up for the next little while. Prime Minister, former Prime Minister in Scott Morrison, gone. The whole point of the way I've always talked to him, and it infuriates people who want the prosecution of or all the rest of it, is just to go, okay, what would it be like if you knew the Treasurer, the Prime Minister, all the rest of it, right? And that's part of that conversation. That's just what we had there. You're obviously going to be a fan of somebody who worked for him, but what do you think about his decision to go now, by-election, not on the same day as Dunkley and other things? Does any of that matter to you?
No, look, I don't think so. I think it's always a timing matter for anyone who's deciding to retire from Parliament or resign from Parliament. But little story, Scott in a lot of ways is responsible for me and my political career
His fault.
because it is his fault. Sorry for all those haters out there.
Yeah.
Off you go. So you can add that to the list.
I just know Twitter's watching tonight.
Yeah. Well, I got rid of that anyway and saved myself the torment. But, you know, I was working on my first campaign, had just joined the Liberal Party, and this woman was mentoring me, and he said to her, look, that new girl you've got, she's wasted, and brought me into my first ever campaign headquarters, which was the 2003 state election, 2004 federal election. I was part of the key tactics group when he was still state director. And then he actually brought me into the Senate when I joined Parliament. So Scott and I have quite a long history together. I think his prime ministerial, his period of being the Prime Minister will be reflected upon much more kindly in future. I think Australians like to tear other Australians down. I think there's a lot of hate and a lot of angst and a lot of anger. But I think when there's a historical reflection and lens put on this, whether it's COVID and how that was handled and Australia was managed through, but even the AUKUS agreement and our relationships there, his Prime Ministership will be looked back with as being very successful.
Look, and again, I get all of the down and I get all of the issues that have frustrated people. But again, stop the boats, cut taxes. He, of course, was involved in trying to go after multinational tax, was stood up for Ukraine pretty quickly, pushed it back against China. He also, of course, saved people when it came to JobKeeper. I understand what the consequences are, but there are people who were talking to me in small business and wages, all the rest of it. These are not unsubstantive things, and I think history is kinder. But James, you are leaning forward.
Well, no. Look, I think the Morrison government is going to be looked at in a much more nuanced way down the road. I mean, look, I pretty publicly disagreed with the man about stuff like the way COVID was managed, and particularly the length of time that the country was kept separated from the rest of the world. I had a big disagreement with him about that. But I will say, in terms of, and we were talking a bit about this off air, foreign policy and standing up for Australia's interests, I think this is something where I don't think he gets anywhere near enough credit. And one area where I think we really need to look at is China, because you will remember that he was very, very strong on the question of China. Where did the pandemic come from? Stop abusing our trade. Stop abusing our goodwill in the Pacific. Stop abusing the global economy with your power to be a bully. He stood up for that, and people said, he's being all hawkish, he's creating all this trouble for China and, for us with China, and, so you go down a different road, and it's interesting because you look at how they've tried to reset the relationship, Penny Wong and Anthony Albanese. And, so what does China do? Exactly what you would predict. They give them a few good headlines and they say, oh, look, we've reset things. But then what are they doing? They're banging sonar pulses at our Navy divers.
Of which Albanese says nothing about.
Which he says nothing about because he wants a good headline. Because he wants a good headline and to say he's the handsome boy who's reset the relationship. And, we're never going to get that inquiry that he wanted, but which we deserve on COVID.
Well, yeah, and look, obviously, as Sherry Markson's been reporting, part of the future seems to be associated with people like Mike Pompeo, who, of course, was the former Secretary of State and they bonded particularly in regards to the threat of China. All right, let's talk about what we think is going to happen tomorrow. There's a few strategic leaks and a little bit of slight insight about what's happening here. I can tell what the spin's going to be here, which was we broke a promise, but we've done it in pursuit of greater fairness. They'll turn around and say certain numbers here, certain numbers there. As I've shown, and I wanted to take some time at the start of the show, not because Scott Morrison was sitting there, but because I wanted to explain. They've had plenty of levers to pull earlier. They didn't pull them. Why? Because there was no electoral need to do so, because the assumption was that they would be flying so high after the year of delivery when it comes to the voice. Budget surplus would mean they're great. We'll go off to an early election like many first-term governments often do. Well, of course, that didn't happen, and they've got the Dunkley by-election, which now means something has to happen or they lose a seat. Now, they would go back to where they were at the election after winning Aston, so it's not about majorities or minorities, but let's put it this way. If Labor wins that seat, then I think there's a chance of an early election later in the year, maybe, but definitely if they lose it, then it's off the table and we go full term to 2025. But James, I can feel the spin already. Now again, we don't know what the numbers are, but the assumption's going to be, yes, but we did it for greater fairness. Does the breaking promise matter if they're able to point to a whole bunch of other people who will now be magically better off as a result?
You would hope that it doesn't. You would hope that people see through that. I mean, I just feel like this government right now is playing to the worst instincts of Australia. You know, that real sort of tall poppy, anti-achievement. You've worked too hard. You've got too much money. Hey, look at you there with too much money. We're gonna, you don't deserve any more money. This is a country where we get so much of our revenue, the government gets so much of its revenue from income tax, much more than most other countries, and that proportion is much higher than it's been for a long time. At the same time, we've got a massive productivity crisis, and we are discouraging people from working harder and starting side businesses and doing gig work and all the flexible things that they say that they want us to do. And there's so many problems with this, not the least of which, you've got a skills shortage, and you are penalizing older, skilled people who are earning a substantial amount of money from staying in with their skills. It's like the new slogan for Australia is, hey, don't work too hard, okay?
Exactly. But also, Holly, the logic here, right? And that's why, again, at the start of the show, I played Stephen Jones, not a bystander, not a backbencher, the assistant treasurer. And when they took $1,500 off 10 million workers, it was because they wanted to fight inflation. Now they're going to turn around and say that millions more workers will be benefited by this decision, which ends up meaning that, it'll be the exact opposite of the same argument that they were launching just, 12, 18 months ago. But again, I can see the spin, and with the majority of the media that have been screaming about the need to change this, that they're going to be able to step around the fundamental here, which is when they look you in the eye and tell you, I 100% will not change it, or I 100% will cut your power bill, that people... They should have to pay a price for that, but whether they will or not, we'll all learn together.
Well, I mean, we did warn you the last election. It won't be easy under Albanese, and I think every Australian family is feeling that. Every household is feeling that it is not easy under Albanese, whether it's higher mortgages, higher grocery bills, higher petrol bills, higher energy bills, higher insurance premiums, whether it's, every single thing has gone up under this government, and every single family is feeling the pinch. And if you are an average family of 4 with an average mortgage, you have to pay an extra $25,000 per year. Now, that is after tax.
Yeah.
And so if you happen to have one income earner that's on $200,000, which if you are in Sydney or Melbourne, we are not talking the high end of the market.
Correct.
And this is the class warfare. And I can tell Mr. Albanese, go for a walk around your gentrified areas now.
There are wharfies earning that much money.
There's a lot of people earning that much money now.
But the idea that it's the bloke in the Rolls Royce is just firing money out the window.
And the thing is, so the people that are earning that amount of money already pay a lot
11%
more tax.
pay 55% of the total bill.
3% pay 30%.
Yeah.
If these people are already paying an awful lot of tax, so just because they were going to get a bigger cut, because they pay more. And in fact, every Australian was going to get a cut from $45,000 on. And now it's just penalising people at the higher end.
But not only that, I mean, this is the thing, and so much of the media has so much to answer for on this. They're called Stage 3
because Stage 1 and 2...
for a reason. Everybody else already got theirs.
Which they didn't vote against, they voted for, then they go to...
And I'm sorry, everybody talks about, democracy's under threat. Well, these got taken to the election. These were passed by Parliament. Now we're just saying...
It's twice it's been passed at election.
The casuistry and the sophistry of Anthony Albanese's, and there are different counts, some say 25, some say 36 times, he said all of this stuff. That tricky language he used to say that our policy is still the same right now, and it's just...
And this won't be a broken promise. It will be a reworked commitment
it's going
or something.
To be a rebranded, recurated.
Pay attention to the spin.
There's some very some right-wing Labor members who are sitting there going, what is going on?
Occasional angry wolfie.
The Teals, because those Teal seats, remember...
They've called for it, but whether they're voters are cranky about it.
Allegra Spender, she said, no, keep them going, and, there's going to be a lot of buyer's regret around some of those electorates, Paul, I'll tell you.
I want to give you an example about just some miserable extents that some people go to save the planet. And also, Trump on his way to the nomination. Hayley, is she just going to stick around in case the Supreme Court does something? Probably, but we'll talk about that next here on Paul Murray Live. Thanks for watching. Apparently, you should cut back on buying new clothes because more clothes means more production, and more production's bad for climate change. Sartorial splendour is something associated, of course, with Senator Holly Hughes and, of course, with James Morrow. So apparently Australians should cut their clothes shopping by 74%. And this is something that apparently will help change the weather. Thoughts?
Cost of living might change people's spending patterns when it comes to new clothes. But I knew we were talking about this, so I specifically wore this top tonight because
Lovely.
I bought this in Moree at a wonderful store, the Brown Hill Miles, that's not there anymore. And I think it is now older than my youngest child, who goes into year 8. So I think there is something to be said for buying quality, though, rather than the fast fashion that falls apart, the made in China stuff at the big fast bulk stores. Certainly buying quality and keeping clothes for that amount of time means I have a lot of them.
But again, it's this central idea that I understand about the want for conservation, the need to do something. Right. We're 1% of the world's
look,
No, but
everyone in Australia stop shopping. We're not going to sell
though,
anything.
But beyond that, though, it's like, and I agree with what you say there, but
So
like as I heard somebody once say, I buy expensive shoes because I'm too poor to buy cheap shoes. You know, and I have to keep replacing them. That aside, it's this whole kind of hair shirt mentality. Over the hair shirts even allowed. Where everything, you can't have fun. You can't have a nice new frock. You can't have a nice new tie. You can't have Australia Day. You can't have this. You can't have that. Everybody's got to be so angry and po-faced and miserable and sad about everything because of the climate.
So can I ask, though, can I wear fur now? Because I've actually got my mother's old fur coat.
Imagine that. You walk into the Senate wearing fur. I'm just fashion. I'm doing it for the climate.
I'm doing it for the climate. Because let me tell you, that animal ain't coming back anytime soon.
Yeah.
No, it ain't coming back anytime soon.
As long as you promise to talk to me the night that you do it, then that's great. Then you can absolutely go nuts. Do it and come and do the interview wearing the fur, see what happens. Of course, host of the US report. What do you think is going to happen tomorrow with Trump, New Hampshire? Your latest polls say he could get half the vote, but if all the Democrats suddenly register as Republicans, Haley could get kinda close.
Well, look, I mean, it's funny because there's this whole thing where all the Democrats are all now trying to spoil for Trump. But the other interesting thing, though, so, Nikki Haley's going to try and get, some Haley Mentum or something like that going on. And she won all 6 votes in Dixfield Notch, which is the first polling booth in New Hampshire to close. So there's strong Paul Tsongas energy there, if you remember that name from the past. But putting that aside, also Bernie Sanders won that too. The bigger question, though, is what's going to happen on the Democrat side. Because remember, Joe Biden is not on the ballot because they wanted South Carolina to be the first state. So he's not on the ballot. So they're trying to run a write-in campaign. There's somebody else called, I think, Dean Phillips, who's got a big campaign going. And if that guy does well, that's going to suggest that really we've seen all this stuff in the polls
just sending the message
that, we're not thrilled about this. And one interesting thing here is I keep saying Joe Biden's not going to be on the ticket in November. If they put somebody younger on, who's in a first-term president, Democrats suddenly have a big advantage because they get a generational mover, first-mover advantage, 100%. Or a generational change against 2 septo or octogenarians. Number 2, their guy's not a lame duck. So it's a whole change to the equation there. This is one of the reasons why I think the Democrats behind closed doors, Paul, are making moves in that direction. And you'll see Biden presented with the opportunity to come out and with dignity be the kingmaker. Who that king or queen is, I don't. Well, we don't know.
Wait, watch and see. All right. So all of that happens, time zones, all the rest of it. Basically lunchtime tomorrow here on Sky News, and then we'll be talking about it by this time tomorrow night. Thank you very much, lady. We'll talk to you all again very soon. Quick break, back with more. About 5 minutes away from the late debate, and they're all back together as it should be. Can I just quickly show you a couple of little extra bits of information about what is happening in the United States right now, including fascinating poll that came out from a joint called Morning Consult in the United States. It's a tracking poll, and there's lots of info here, including, let's go through the top line, right? If an election was held today, what happens? 10% vote for anyone else apart from Trump and Biden. Otherwise, it's 45 to 40 where Trump would win. Now, interestingly, the Democrats, of which those people, only 82% have commitment to Joe Biden. Republicans, 90%. Of people who voted for Biden in 2020, he's got 79% of those people, 12% are voting somewhere else, 5% are voting for Trump, and others probably will sit it out. Meantime, for Trump voters, they're going to turn up by 90%. So, if your idea is that Trump won't win because 80 million people still hate him, well, according to those numbers, not the case. However, independents are desperately important in American politics. They are the difference in many a swing state. And remember, all of this comes down to just 8 states. Well, according to this poll that was around last week from Ipsos, published by NBC News, it shows that 55% of independents would not vote for Trump if he's found guilty. Just some data. It's what we do each and every night. Thanks for watching. Here's the late debate.